now making a lot of noise. Pure coincidence, I'm sure. Okay, carry on, John.
She did say she might die in a helicopter accident as well. Yeah, so around this time, as we were told, there was because of Prince Charles' desire to marry Camilla Parker Bowles, and his ambition to do that, even though Diana was still alive, and that's the crucial point. That in itself caused a massive crisis constitutionally, so much so that I think in about '95, Tony Wright, who was the parliamentary aide to Lord Irvine, who was then Lord Chancellor, publicly stated that Prince Charles' marital ambitions would end up in the church being disestablished. It was such a massive constitutional problem.
So the monarch would no longer be head of the Church of England, and the Church of England would no longer be in Parliament, for instance.
Exactly. We would become a secular state for the first time in British history. It was that massive at the time. And so there was some debate. There was some debate going on as to how to deal with this. Yeah, and with MI5, it's not quite as black and white as it, but it's the easiest way to explain it. With MI5 thinking that Camilla Parker Bowles was really the problem here. You know, any thought of getting rid of Diana was too stupid. It was too big. The backlash would be too much. If, on the other hand, in order to solve this constitutional problem, Camilla Parker Bowles disappeared, then given public opinion with regard to Camilla, especially at that time, it would be easier to achieve. MI6, on the other hand, who are much more the British establishment, wanted to get rid of Diana. That had been on the table for some time. Up at this, we're talking November '95.
But MI5 wanted to get rid of Camilla Parker Bowles.
Camilla Parker Bowles, yeah.
And she was involved, wasn't she, in a mysterious road accident?
Yeah, this is all forgotten, you see, about 6 weeks prior to Diana's death. And this is another point we must talk about as well.
It is in the book. I don't know this myself. It is actually in the book.
But the whole road traffic accident scenario is a known assassination technique.
The Boston Breaks?
The Boston Breaks.
Well, let's talk about that quickly, shall we? Okay. And then we'll go back to Camilla and Boston Breaks.
Yeah, the Boston Breaks. I mean, Diana always said herself she believed that her bodyguard and former lover, Sergeant Barry Manicky, who died in a road traffic accident in 1987, was killed by MI5. She stated that publicly. She stated that on video. And it went out on the ABC News Network in America.
In America.
And there are several other instances of assassination by road traffic accident. The most famous, I suppose, apart from Diana, must be Sir Ranulph Fiennes. Now, Sir Ranulph Fiennes, everybody knows as the world-famous explorer.
Yes.
He's a former SAS officer. He's actually a personal friend of Prince Charles. He's a cousin to the royal family. You don't get sources much more eminent and credible, if you like, than that. Sir Ranulph Fiennes described in detail what the Boston Breaks assassination technique is, how it works, and effectively it's... And he recounted one episode when someone was assassinated in such a manner in England in 1986, a year before Barry Manicky died in his road traffic accident. And effectively, it's a small microchip that is planted on the car that takes over the car's steering and brakes, and the car is then taken over by remote control.
There must be some mechanical thing. You can't, because cars aren't steered electronically, are they? Then?
By an onboard computer, yeah.
John, we're going to have to go for a break now. If you'd like to text in your questions or comments for John King, why not do so now to 87778 with the word EDGE, and then your text. See you very soon. Welcome back to On the Edge with me, Theo Chalmers, and my special guest, John King. I apologise for having a few problems with our graphics tonight, but hey, we are live, so that's just how it is. John, just before the break, we were talking about the Boston Breaks, and I was saying to you that I don't understand how you could take over the steering of a car with the use of some electronic device, because there's mechanical connection between the steering wheel and the wheels in most cars.
Yeah, I mean, I'm no expert either on exactly how that works in terms of the actual mechanics of it, but I can only repeat what Sir Ranulph Fiennes describes in his book, and that is that the microchip transceiver takes over the EMS, the electronic management system of the car, and it is then taken over by remote control, and the car can be steered by remote control. I know it all sounds a bit James Bond, Theo, but you know, we can send rockets to the moon and Mars and wherever else by remote control. We can fly spy drones by remote control. You know, we can drive cars by remote control, and cars can be taken over, according to Sir Ranulph Fiennes, former SAS officer himself. And he cites an example of the Boston Brakes in action, where a Major Michael Marmon, an SAS officer at the time, was assassinated by the Boston Brakes method in a car crash. The reason I was told in following up investigations and asking questions about the Boston Brakes amongst some of the SAS and guys I was talking about earlier is it's used because it's deniable, simply because it's deniable. If you shoot someone, they've been assassinated.
There's a hole in them, and it has to be explained, yeah.
Yeah, pretty well anyway. But you know, if someone dies in a car crash, people say, well, you know, it was a car crash. People have accidents, and so it's very deniable, and it's proved, allegedly anyway, it's proved very successful for that reason.
I've got Gerard in London is saying, a drunk chauffeur in a powerful car seems more likely.
Well, that's what you're supposed to think, isn't it? That's exactly what you're supposed to think.
Is it impossible?
It's not impossible, no. It's not impossible. But Henri Paul, all the evidence, when you look at the proper evidence, suggests that Henri Paul was not drunk. The blood sample on which that verdict was based was never DNA tested or identified.
And it also had a ridiculously high level of carbon monoxide.
Yeah, the file from which it was taken was labelled unknown male. It wasn't Henri Paul's file. And yes, it contained 20.7% carbon monoxide poisoning. Now, if you or I had 20% carbon monoxide running around our blood right now,
we'd be unconscious.
We could certainly be unconscious, yeah. We'd certainly be extremely uncomfortable, especially if we had about 1.5 or 2 bottles of wine inside us as well, and prescription drugs. All of these...
so it seems like it might have been the blood of somebody who'd committed suicide, put a hose through the window of their car.
That makes sense, doesn't it?
It does seem to be.
That makes absolute sense, yeah.
I know also there's a film of Henri Paul on the night in the Ritz Hotel doing his shoelace up, and he's doing his shoelace up standing up. He doesn't sit down.
No, and he's
now, if you've had a drink,
guests,
I imagine it's actually quite hard to tie your shoelace up standing up, isn't it?
He's acting perfectly normally, talking to guests quite comfortably, being congenial, walking around like a very sober person. He may have had a couple of drinks. The evidence seems to suggest he did have a couple of Ricards at the Ritz. Maybe he did. Even if he was blind drunk, it still doesn't prove it was a drink-drive accident that killed Diana. No. But he wasn't blind drunk because there were 2 professionally trained VIP bodyguards with him. Both, you know, former, well, Rhys Jones particularly, a former crack elite forces guy, and both of them testified that they were with him for 2 hours leading up to the drive from the Ritz to the Almar Tunnel, and they have stated categorically that he was not drunk, and they would not have let him drive the car had he been drunk. And all the forensic evidence as well supports that claim.
All right, let's look at let's go back to Camilla Parker Bowles for a moment. Assuming that MI5 wanted to kill her, would Charles have been involved in this, Prince Charles?
Well, that is speculation that I really can't answer that. I mean, we all have our opinions, but I don't know. But what I do know is that Camilla Parker Bowles was involved in a near-fatal accident about 6 or 8 weeks prior to Diana's accident, and it was a very similar scenario. She was driving alone in her car, and she suddenly, mysteriously lost control. This is exactly what happened to Henri Paul. This is exactly what Sir Ranulph Fiennes says happened in the scenario he recounts. That also involved a character named Sir Peter Horsley, who was a former equerry to the Queen, an air marshal, very high-ranking officer. He says as well that he was driving his car, and at the moment another car overtook him and allegedly took over the steering of his car. He'd completely lost control of his car. Now, these are statements coming from the drivers of two people who have been involved in these scenarios and survived, but of course Omnipol didn't survive to tell us a tale. But we do know he lost control, and the manner in which the car acted is precisely how the cars acted in the other scenarios as well. It didn't just crash into a pillar. Once he lost control of his car, his brakes failed. He couldn't use his brakes.
There were no skid marks or anything?
There were no skid marks. There would have been, obviously, if he'd have had brakes. His brakes failed, and he swerved one way, then the other way, and then back again into the concrete pillar. And that is very specific. There's a very, very specific manoeuvre, because that's exactly what happened to Sir Peter Horsley as well. And in the case of Camilla Parker Bowles. So whatever we might think about the Camilla Parker Bowles scenario, MI5 being involved, I was told clearly and categorically that MI5 chose Camilla Parker Bowles as the one to get rid of, and that would solve the constitutional crisis. It would also frighten Diana to death and bring her back into line, because in their opinion she was out of line. It would, you know, kind of create a scenario where she would be then forced to toe the line through her own sort of fears for her own life.
Didn't Charles have another standby female?
Well, several probably, but certainly, yes, certainly we know about Tiggy Leg Bourke, don't we? The royal nanny, yeah, whom Diana thought he wanted to marry at one point, yeah.
Okay.
And so, if that was the case, then who knows what was going on?
So, all right, well, let us assume for a moment, for the sake of this programme, that MI5 originally wanted to kill Camilla Parker Bowles. They made an attempt on her life, and that failed. But you're saying that other dark forces, MI6, CIA, wanted to get rid of Diana at any cost. You know, what was the motive? Because did they care about the royal family's predicament? Or was there more? Yes, or was
MI6,
there...
of course. MI6 is the royal intelligence agency, if you like. Yeah, they are. Yes, very much so. I mean, MI6. Prince Philip is very closely involved with MI6, not in operations necessarily, but he's very involved. His personal friend for years and years, the Bilderberg founder, Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands, is a known MI6 agent. There's very much involved, whereas MI5 is more, you know, it is a more legitimate secret police agency, if you like. MI6 is...
Well, it kills people much more nicely and politely.
Yes, that's right. They're much more polite about it, yeah.
So,
well, they usually fail, don't they? So
I don't know.
MI6 probably don't. Anyway, being more, you know, serious about it, what brought the CIA into the equation, as far as we've been able to discover, was unquestionably the landmine scenario.
OK, let's talk about that then.
Well, landmines, people's reaction when you say that quite often is, you know, a few landmines. So you've got stealth bombers costing God knows how much.
A couple of $1 billion
each. etc. A few landmines. Well, let me just put people right on that first of all. You know, there are 200 million landmines deployed around the world as we speak. There are 200 million more stockpiled and ready to be used. There are over 1 billion small munitions that are inserted into these insidious, cowardly weapons that explode and fly off all over the place, which also brings into the equation airborne mines. It wasn't just landmines Diana was campaigning for. It was specifically at the time, but the treaty that she persuaded President Clinton to look at and back and support involved also
anti-personnel
landmines and airborne mines, which people...
Those are fragmentary bombs that break up into lots of different pieces, and just as was used in Gaza recently.
Exactly, like the phosphorus bombs and like the depleted uranium cluster bombs used in Iraq and probably Afghanistan as well. We're talking a multi-billion dollar industry. It's not just a few landmines.
And she did get